Most people spend their lives searching for motivation, hoping someday they'll wake up feeling ready, confident, and unstoppable. But the uncomfortable truth is this: readiness is rare, confidence is rented, and motivation is unreliable. What actually moves the needle, quietly, predictably, almost boringly, is discipline. Discipline when no one is watching. Discipline when excuses feel reasonable. Discipline when comfort whispers, "Not today." Imagine sitting with a man who doesn't shout, doesn't rush, and doesn't try to impress you. He simply lays out how life really works, not in theories, not in hype, but in cause and effect. 3 hours of calm, deliberate thinking about why people stay stuck and why others steadily climb. No shortcuts, no magic mornings, just a clear-eyed explanation of how small decisions, repeated daily, shape fortunes, health, relationships, and self-respect. This isn't about forcing yourself into misery or living like a monk. It's about understanding that every neglected discipline carries a bill and every practiced discipline pays interest. Whether it's reading when others scroll, saving when others spend, or acting when others hesitate, the gap between ordinary and exceptional rarely comes from talent. It comes from habits honored over time. If you listen closely, you begin to realize something powerful. Discipline is not punishment, it's protection. It protects your future from your moods. It protects your goals from your impulses. It protects your life from drifting into a place you never consciously chose. Ladies and gentlemen, most people treat discipline as if it were a personality trait, something you are either born with or forever lack. They look at disciplined individuals and assume there is some genetic wiring, some rare internal engine that makes effort easy and consistency natural. That belief is comforting, because if discipline is a trait, then failure can be blamed on nature rather than choice. But discipline does not live in personality, it lives in decisions. And, more specifically, it lives in daily decisions that are so small they often feel insignificant in the moment. Every day presents a series of quiet forks in the road. Do you get up when the alarm rings, or do you negotiate with it? Do you do the task you promised yourself you would do, or do you delay it until tomorrow? Do you spend time improving a skill, or do you spend time escaping discomfort? None of these choices feel dramatic. They don't announce themselves as life-altering. Yet they are the raw material from which discipline is built. Discipline is not an event, it is a pattern, and patterns are formed one decision at a time. What makes this idea powerful is that it removes discipline from the realm of identity and places it squarely in the realm of control. You don't need to become a different person to become disciplined. You don't need more confidence, more motivation, or a better mood. You only need to make the right decision when the moment asks for it. And that moment usually lasts just a few seconds. The decision to act is brief. The benefits compound quietly over years. People often wait for discipline to feel natural, but it never does at first. Discipline feels awkward, even unnatural, because it runs against impulse. Impulse seeks comfort, speed, and relief. Discipline seeks long-term benefit, stability, and growth. The disciplined person is not someone who lacks impulse. It is someone who has learned to pause long enough to choose against it. That pause is not heroic. It is practiced. There is also a subtle advantage to understanding discipline as a daily decision. Failure loses its power. Missing a workout, skipping a reading session, or wasting a day does not label you as an undisciplined person. It simply means you made a poor decision that day. Tomorrow offers a clean slate, not a character indictment. This mindset keeps people in the game long enough to improve instead of quitting out of shame or self-judgment. Over time, these daily decisions begin to shape reputation, results, and self-trust. You start to believe yourself when you make commitments. You stop relying on external pressure because internal standards take over. Others may call this willpower or strength, but it is really just consistency compounded. What looks like discipline from the outside is, from the inside, a series of ordinary choices honored repeatedly. The Most important realization is this: discipline is always available. It does not require inspiration, perfect conditions, or a special temperament. It only requires that, in the moment of choice, you decide in favor of the future rather than the present, again and again, until the pattern becomes your default way of operating. Ladies and gentlemen, small actions rarely feel important while you are doing them. They feel almost invisible, too trivial to matter, especially in a world that celebrates dramatic transformations and overnight success. Yet nearly every extraordinary outcome that appears impressive from a distance is built on a foundation of repeated, unremarkable behaviors. The mistake most people make is looking for progress that feels significant instead of progress that is conscious. Tent. A single small action does almost nothing on its own. Reading a few pages, saving a modest amount, practicing a skill for a short time, or making one better decision in a day barely moves the needle. That is precisely why these actions are easy to skip. The cost of avoidance feels negligible, and the reward of effort feels delayed. But time changes the equation. When small actions are repeated, they stop behaving linearly and start behaving exponentially. What once felt pointless becomes powerful, not because the actions changed, but because time was allowed to do its work. This is where long-term outcomes quietly separate people. Most individuals overestimate what they can achieve quickly and underestimate what they can achieve gradually. They abandon simple routines because the early results don't validate the effort. Meanwhile, those who stay with the routine accumulate advantages that are invisible until they are undeniable. Skill sharpens, judgment improves, habits stabilize, and momentum builds without noise or announcement. There is also a psychological shift that comes with repetition. Each small action reinforces identity. When you show up repeatedly, even in mode, you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. That self-image matters more than motivation. It changes how you approach future decisions, making the next small action easier to take. Over time, discipline becomes less about force and more about alignment with who you believe you are. The danger of ignoring small actions is that their absence compounds just as reliably as they presence. Skipping one practice session does not ruin a skill, but skipping consistently ensures stagnation. Spending a little more than you earn once may not matter, but doing it habitually guarantees stress. The future is not shaped by dramatic mistakes as often as it is shaped by tiny lapses repeated without reflection. Comfort, when chosen repeatedly, quietly steals potential. Extraordinary. Outcomes often look unfair to those who did not witness the process. They assume luck, privilege, or exceptional talent because the real cause is too mundane to be satisfying. The truth is less exciting but far more empowering. Ordinary actions, executed with unusual consistency, create results that feel extraordinary only to those who didn't practice them. The real leverage in life is not intensity, but duration. Anyone can do something hard for a short time. Very few are willing to do something small for a long time. Yet that is where the advantage hides. When effort is modest enough to be sustainable and repetition is long enough to allow compounding, progress becomes inevitable rather than hopeful, and the future begins to bend in your favor through the quiet force of accumulated SMA. LL wins. Ladies and gentlemen, neglect and procrastination rarely announce themselves as serious problems. They arrive quietly, disguised as harmless delays, reasonable excuses, and the promise that there will be plenty of time later. Because the immediate consequences are small or invisible, the behavior feels safe. Nothing collapses today. Nothing obvious breaks. And that is exactly why neglect is so dangerous. Its cost is not paid up front, it is financed over time with interest. Every neglected responsibility creates a subtle form of debt. A task delayed today becomes a heavier task tomorrow. A skill not practiced slowly dulls. A relationship not maintained weakens without confrontation. These losses happen gradually, which makes them easy to ignore, but their accumulation is relentless. By the time the damage is noticeable, Reversing it requires far more effort than consistent attention ever would have. Procrastination also carries a psychological toll that most people underestimate. Each time you avoid something you know you should do, you teach yourself a quiet lesson. Your word to yourself is negotiable. That erosion of self-trust doesn't stay confined to one area of life. It spreads. Decision-making becomes harder, confidence becomes shakier, and even simple tasks begin to feel heavier because they are now accompanied by guilt and mental resistance. The mind becomes cluttered with undone obligations, each one draining energy without producing value. There is also an opportunity cost that rarely gets calculated. Time spent delaying is not neutral. It is time that would have been used to build momentum. While you hesitate, the world does not pause. Others are learning, refining, saving, and improving. The gap between where you are and where you could be quietly widens, not through dramatic failure, but through inaction. In competitive environments, this gap becomes especially costly because progress is relative as much as it is absolute. Neglect has a compounding effect similar to discipline, but in the opposite direction. Small acts of avoidance repeated over time create fragility. Health declines not from one bad meal, but from patterns of neglect. Careers stall not from one missed opportunity, but from consistent underpreparation. Financial stress grows not from one poor decision, but from habitual postponement of responsibility. The trajectory is shaped long before the consequences become unavoidable. Perhaps the most deceptive aspect of procrastination is the comfort it provides in the moment. Delaying feels like relief, but it is borrowed relief. It trades short-term ease for long-term pressure. What could have been handled calmly and incrementally becomes urgent and stressful later. Life begins to feel harder, not because the NGEs are greater, but because they have been allowed to pile up. The true cost of neglect is not just what goes wrong, but what never has the chance to go right. Skills that were never developed, opportunities never pursued, and potential never realized leave no visible scars, yet they represent the largest loss of all. When consistently addressed, small responsibilities keep life manageable and forward-moving, but when ignored, they quietly shape a future filled with unnecessary difficulty and regret that could have been avoided through timely action and steady attention to what matters most. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom is often misunderstood as the absence of rules, limits, or obligations. Many people believe that being free means doing what you want when you want without interfere. But this version of freedom is shallow and short-lived. In reality, the highest form of freedom is built on personal responsibility. Without responsibility, freedom collapses into chaos, dependence, and eventually frustration. With responsibility, freedom expands, becoming stable, durable, and deeply satisfying. Personal responsibility begins with the acceptance that outcomes are largely shaped by choices. This does not mean the world is fair or that circumstances do not matter. It means that within any set of conditions there is still agency. When people avoid responsibility, they also surrender control. They become reactive, blaming external forces for internal results. While this may protect the ego, it quietly traps the individual in a cycle of helplessness. Responsibility, by contrast, restores power. It shifts focus from what should have happened to what can be done next. There is a direct relationship between responsibility and freedom in practical life. Financial responsibility creates options rather than constraints. Physical responsibility preserves energy and independence. Intellectual responsibility sharpens judgment and reduces reliance on others' opinions. In each case, taking ownership early prevents future limitations. What feels like restriction in the present becomes liberation later. The discipline to manage yourself well is what prevents others or circumstances from managing you poorly. Many people resist responsibility because it feels heavy. It demands effort, honesty, and delayed gratification, but avoiding it does not remove the burden. It postpones and magnifies it. The person who refuses to take responsibility today inherits a more complicated and less forgiving version of the same problem tomorrow. Over time, life becomes narrower, not wider, as choices shrink and pressures increase. Responsibility, though demanding, is lighter in the long run because it keeps problems small and solvable. Another overlooked aspect of responsibility is its effect on self-respect. When you consistently own your decisions and follow through on your commitments, you develop internal credibility. You trust yourself. That trust reduces anxiety and second-guessing because you know you will act when action is required. This internal stability is a form of freedom few people recognize until they lack it. Without self-trust, even simple decisions feel burdensome, and freedom becomes paralyzing rather than empowering. Personal responsibility also clarifies priorities. When you accept that your time, energy, and attention are yours to manage, distractions lose some of their power. You become more selective, not because you are constrained, but because you understand trade-offs. Saying no becomes easier when you recognize that every yes carries a cost. This clarity creates space for meaningful work, deeper relationships, and long-term goals that would otherwise be crowded out by impulse and noise. True freedom is not granted by circumstances. It is earned through consistent ownership of one's actions and attitudes. The more responsibility you take, the fewer excuses you need, and the less dependent you become on favorable conditions. Over time, this mindset produces a life that is not only more effective, but more flexible, resilient, and self-directed, where freedom is not something hoped for in the future, but something experienced daily through deliberate choices and accountability to oneself. Ladies and gentlemen, disciplined thinking is often mistaken for rigidity or narrow-mindedness, but in reality, it is the practice of consistently choosing clarity over comfort and reason over impulse. It is not about having more thoughts. It is about having better ones, and more importantly, having them repeatedly. Just as money compounds through steady reinvestment, disciplined thinking compounds through consistent application, gradually reshaping how decisions are made and how outcomes unfold over time. At the beginning, disciplined thinking feels slow. It requires pausing before reacting, questioning assumptions, and resisting easy explanations. The immediate payoff is minimal, which is why many abandon it. But each time you think carefully instead of emotionally, you slightly improve the quality of your judgment. One good decision rarely transforms a life, but 1,000 slightly better decisions inevitably do. The gains are small, but they stack in your favor quietly and relentlessly. As disciplined thinking is practiced, it begins to reduce errors rather than create dramatic wins. This is a crucial distinction. Most progress comes not from brilliant moves, but from avoiding foolish ones. Clear thinking helps you recognize when the odds are unfavorable, when information is incomplete, or when ego is distorting perception. By consistently sidestepping preventable mistakes, you preserve time, energy, and resources that would otherwise be lost. Over years, the absence of major errors becomes a significant advantage. Another compounding effect of disciplined thinking is the improvement of learning speed. When you think clearly, you are better able to extract lessons from both success and failure. You stop repeating the same mistakes because you take time to understand why things worked or didn't. This reflective loop accelerates growth. Each experience becomes a teacher rather than a random event. Over time, your judgment becomes more precise, and your intuition becomes more reliable because it is built on a foundation of examined experience. Disciplined thinking also strengthens emotional stability. By separating facts from feelings, you become less reactive to short-term noise. This steadiness allows for consistency, especially during stress or uncertainty. While others overcorrect, panic, or chase trends, disciplined thinkers stay aligned with long-term principles. This consistency compounds trust, both internally and externally. People rely on those whose decisions are not SWI, yet by every fluctuation, and opportunities tend to flow toward those who demonstrate sound judgment over time. There is also a subtle identity shift that occurs. As disciplined thinking becomes habitual, it changes how you see yourself. You begin to identify as someone who thinks before acting, who values evidence over excitement, and who plays long games, rather than chasing immediate gratificat. That identity influences future choices automatically, reducing friction and effort. Decisions become cleaner, faster, and more aligned with long-term goals. Over long periods, disciplined thinking reshapes the trajectory of a life. It influences what you pursue, what you avoid, and how you respond when outcomes are uncertain. The compounding is not dramatic day to day, but it is decisive decade to decade. Small improvements in judgment, applied consistently, create a widening gap between those who react to life and those who direct it, producing results that appear exceptional only because the process that created them was patiently repeated and rarely abandoned.